Hello, everyone. My name is Khareghani, and I'm very excited to be here today to chair this amazing panel. The idea behind this panel is to actually talk to CEOs of AI unicorns born and bred here in the UK. So we don't have to go all the way to Valley to find them. They are right here, and they have done amazing things, raised inordinate amounts of money, and are running incredibly successful companies. And today's our chance to learn from them and find out how they did it, find out what barriers they've broken down to make it easier for those that follow behind them, and just kind of get to know what this landscape looks like and how we might want to do the same thing again. I am going to introduce everybody just by name, and then I'm going to hand over for them to talk about their companies. So, to my left, we have Poppy Gustafsson, who is the CEO of Darktrace, followed by Nigel Toon, who is the co-founder and CEO, the founder and CEO of Graphcore, and then we have Sachin Duggal, who is the co-founder of Builder.ai, who is also known as Chief Wizard. Right? Yeah, we're not going to let him live that down, but maybe you can tell us about that. I'm going to start off with Nigel, if you don't mind, telling us a little bit about Graphcore, what the company's mission is, and some of your achievements to date. And we'll do the same thing across everybody else. So after, if Poppy doesn't mind.
Sure. So Graphcore is a young company. We started around 2016. We have developed a new kind of processor to accelerate artificial intelligence. So it's a hardware business. We're building a semiconductor chip used in TSMC for manufacturing. We build a system that we then goes into servers and goes into data centers. We have raised about $700 million in venture capital for the company. Have about 450 people in the company, mainly here in the UK. We have offices in Bristol, which is our kind of headquarters, in Cambridge, in London. Have a team in Gdansk in Poland. We have a team in Taiwan where we're doing some of the operations side, working with our manufacturing partners, and then sales teams in the US, in Europe, and actually quite a big team in China. China is quite an interesting market for us for our products as well. Maybe it's because we're not an American company, being a British company, actually we're looked on rather more favorably in that territory.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Nigel. Poppy.
Yes, so I am the co-founder and CEO of Darktrace. So Darktrace is 10 years old. We had our 10-year anniversary this summer. And we are a business that applies AI to the challenge of cybersecurity. And it is such an interesting space to be operating because you get the privilege of seeing geopolitics and sort of cyber crime playing out across all over the world and across all different types of businesses. So today we've got about 2,500 people all over the world, and our R&D team is in Cambridge, and I think that is where that real sort of spark of brilliance comes from, the fantastic team that we have there. So yeah, that's Darktrace.
And Sachin, please.
Awesome. So Builder.ai is a composable software platform. So think about Lego meets AI to manufacture software applications. So our largest customers could be a very well-known airline. Our smallest customer could be Strawberry Fields Nursery School in Notting Hill, and everyone in the middle. And kind of what we found was that the world was going through this transition that everyone needed software to be in business, to unlock their potential. But most people didn't know how to go about doing it. And up till now, what we've seen is a total failure of no-code, low-code, because all it's done is given people canvases. But the average customer is not a creator, they're a curator. You give them a white canvas, they don't really know where to go. And so we also started in 2016. We use AI as a part of the building process. So everything from a neural net to allow us to build flows, so we know what features flow to what feature. Seems like an obvious one, but it's actually really difficult. Through to how we use computer vision to see if it looks like what it was designed like. Instead of a human sitting and drawing red circles around why a design doesn't sort of look like the application. We're about 1,000 people. Yeah, very happy to be here.
Brilliant. Wonderful to have you all here. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the changes in the macro environment. So not only the kind of changes in the funding landscape, but also in the regulatory landscape and everything in between that's happened since you all started your companies. And I wanted to ask you each about the kind of specific challenges and particular opportunities you may see for companies that are starting now as opposed to when you started. Shall we go to you first this time, Poppy?
Yeah, of course. So cybersecurity is a really interesting space because regulation is having a real sort of soft impact there sort of fairly on. So 10 years ago, we would go in and show our software to a prospect and say, hey, great news, we've just found a nation state inside your organization and we've stopped it. You must be thrilled. And these people would just say, you know what, I'd just rather not know, which you just find completely shocking. Like, how can you not want to know that? And there has subsequently been a very strong pressure on businesses to disclose whenever they are victims of cybercrime and the financial impacts of that. And what that's done is shifted the sentiment away from that blinkered, I can just make sure that there is never any sort of cyber impact to my business and I will always be secure. And if anyone ever tells me anything to the contrary, I'm just not going to listen, to actually cybercrime is a fact of life and it's okay to talk about it and talk about the measures that you're taking. So regulation has interestingly made businesses more cooperative and more discussive about what they're seeing and the steps that they are taking. In terms of the sort of recent macro, the big headline is obviously AI. Apparently that's a thing that has just been invented in the form of ChatGPT, which is in itself really exciting because it means that you're not having to go and talk to prospects and saying, you know, AI is going to be a really useful part of your cybersecurity stack. They can immediately relate and understand why that's relevant. But the flip side to that is suddenly people believe that AI has become this very, very narrow thing of just all things large language models, for example. And it's not. AI is this incredibly broad, diverse toolkit, and you're not always going to be using the same tool for every job, and sometimes it's a combination of. So the education piece has shifted away from evangelizing around AI to talking about the breadth of AI. And so that's definitely what I've seen sort of sentiment changing recently. In terms of opportunities, they're just enormous. It's such a fast changing space, and it's regulation will change it. You know, the businesses, the technology, it's change it. Our ability to use AI at scale will really accelerate with, you know, companies like Graphcore, which means it's going to be a really good time to come in and create something new. And a lot of the big established organizations that are already occupying this space have an entire business to protect. They're less able to take risks and experiments in the way that a business that is young and fresh and has all of this and from the start can build a business based around AI at its very core in a way that a company that's much older wouldn't be able to achieve. So I think it's a really exciting time for people to be going out and creating businesses.
Brilliant. Thank you, Poppy. Nigel, anything to add in terms of how the environment's changed or any kind of advice that you'd give in terms of approach? Obviously, Poppy's talked about, you know, that being able to be agile and take these risks and put AI first in your company and build around it. Any other kind of ideas or thoughts that you might have?
Yeah, I think I liked your comment that AI seemed to be invented in the beginning of this year or end of last year. And you know, everybody now talks about generative AI and, you know, all the wonderful things it will do, you know, writes that story for you, for your kids at night with all their favorite characters included in it. But I think we missed the point. I always think it's a misnomer to call it generative AI because the real breakthrough here is we are turning computers from things that we have to program, as sort of Builder.ai is showing and helping to solve, into machines that people can use to solve really difficult problems. And it's that the fact that the generation of these stories is actually done by people who can just write some prompts and speak in English to the machines. And it feels like we are somewhere really advanced in this process. But I would use, a few grey hairs, I would use an analogy from the computer gaming industry. I would say we're probably round about Pac-Man. It's color, and it's a really good game, but it's nowhere near the three-dimensional interactive games that we have today. And that's where AI is going to go. And so I think if you're thinking about AI and becoming an AI-first business, you've really got to think about where this technology is going to take you in the next couple of years and how you would apply it. And I think within that as well, again, we can look back in history a little bit and look at things like electricity. Because I think AI is as fundamental as that, or steam engines. And when these breakthrough inventions were produced, they were used in very point-based solutions. Electricity was just used for light bulbs. That's all it was used for. And then suddenly it started to pervade industries, and industries started to change dramatically. And the effect was enormous in terms of how factories got rebuilt because they could take advantage of electric engines. You didn't need to have all these pulleys and things running around anymore, and everything changed. And it's this idea of this system change that AI is going to cause, which I think is a really interesting phase that we haven't yet moved into. So AI will pervade everything, but it's also going to change lots of things as well, I think.
And the societal change is driven by that as well. Like, lighting meant that our working days were extended. I suspect already things like AI are changing the way that we communicate with each other because you want to prove that you're a real person and not some generative chat thing.
Yeah, there was an amazing, simple application I saw where there was this autistic gardener. And he was the best gardener there was, but unable to communicate with his customers. And he started using ChatGPT to write his emails to his customers. And he was able to write enough and sort of get enough prompts that he would write really lucid emails to his customers to explain, his quote and what he could do. And it's just transformed how he's able to operate. And that's just a really simple example, but it sort of shows how AI is going to really change how we work and how we interact, I think.
And indeed, what companies we may build.
Yeah, and I think you hit a really important point. I love the Pac-Man analogy, and I think there's another really interesting one. If you imagine when AOL launched, everyone thought the internet started that day.
Yeah.
Because you got this disk, you plug it in, it would start. But actually, you were using dial-up way before. And we're sort of at that precipice of like, well, what is the AOL equivalent of where we are now? It's not an evolvement of LLMs or natural language models. Actually, they've been around for a while. BERT's almost a decade old, if not more. What principally changed in November was the user interface.
Yeah.
It felt like WhatsApp. What else do you do on WhatsApp? You talk to your friends, your spouse, your parents. So now your sort of ontology of the user experience is like it's a human, right? The second, which I thought was just fascinating, is they slowed the response down. So if you see when you talk to ChatGPT, sometimes it can take 30 seconds to write an answer out. It doesn't take 30 seconds to get the answer. It has the answer in probably less than half a second. But it slows the local echo so that because our mind cannot deal with quick responses, we doubt the response. But the slower the response comes, the more modulated. So again, second improvement in user interface. Then the third was the vocabulary changed. We didn't talk about statistically incorrect things. We talked about hallucinations. But hallucination's a human concept.
Yeah.
This thing is just confabulating, so it's just got incorrect memories, which statistically has got the wrong words together. And so, the interesting thing in this is that we're so early in the cycle that it's wide open. we haven't solved problems of, so if I give you another big problem, right? So you have, today volume is associated with accuracy. So you go back to Shakespeare, it's like, he doth speak the loudest shall be the most accurate. Well, we know that's not true. But today what happens is, because of how these models are trained, if something is just indexed more, it ranks higher. Now, imagine that, and then you couple that with this issue that there's no single version of history. So imagine you wanted to teach American independence. You teach a kid in New York and you teach a kid in London. There are different versions of American independence. But if you have one LLM, you now have basically reduced history down to one version, which is likely to be a mixed-match, incorrect version of both. And so this becomes really fascinating because it starts to go to the, I give you the Rail Player example. We thought Rail Player was coming out, oh my God, there's going to be streaming video, and like, that's it, cable TV is over. And then you sat there and you watched 1%, 5%, 10%, and you got 30 seconds of grainy video. Now look at Netflix, and a decade and a half on from Rail Player, and now you're actually in the world where you kind of don't use cable TV or satellite TV as much. And so if you're starting a business now, I think you have some really core infrastructure. It's like when you were starting a business 20 years ago before the cloud, you had to build all the infrastructure. Well, now you don't.
Right.
And actually now you don't have to build a lot of the AI infrastructure. But the key is, I'd say the last thing is just be honest with what you're building. If you're building a wrapper around an LLM, you're not building an AI business. If you're daisy chaining models, you're building an engineering platform. If you're building like unique IP and you're bringing things together and it's different models and you're moving data across, like then you may actually end up building an AI, and that's perfectly fine. Like, everyone doesn't need to build a core model. We don't need that many of them.
And who is that honesty for then? Is that for the investors?
I think it's for everyone. Unfortunately or fortunately, and this sort of talks about the last few years, last year was a pretty shitty year for raising cash, except if you were in AI. But then you started to see these stories of people launching a business, and then 3 months in, they're raising a Series A with AI. I was like, either you have 100 PhDs working and you did this at some brightening speed, but like Srini is here and we spent 4 years building some of our stuff and we're just about getting it out the door and it works. And so I think the venture world and the entrepreneur world sort of needs to come to a realization of where the truth is. And I think that will just bode well for everyone.
Yeah. I think the capital markets have changed dramatically over the last 18 months for anybody trying to build a business at the moment. I think AI is a standout exception. And part of that, I think, is to do with a sort of inefficiency in the market where actually the investors don't fully understand yet how these businesses are going to be successful. And so there are opportunities for somebody who's got a good track record to step forward and raise lots of money. There are opportunities for people who've got a great idea to step forward and get money, because there's that inefficiency is still in the system today with AI startups. But that won't survive. There will be a washout. It's a bit like the dot-com bubble in some ways, because people will work out which are the business models that work, which are the technologies that work, which are the people that have real knowledge. And so, I think there's still that opportunity. If you know what you're doing, you've got a great idea that you can build a big business here, and there's opportunities to get it started.
And there's something, and just to add to that, I think there's something to be said about the founder problem fit. I actually think all the LLMs that exist today, if we roll forward 10 years, they will not be in this formation. We'll all be laughing, thinking we thought the world had already finished, and it's just started. But the key is going to be who takes that precipice step. You've got to be really fascinated by the problem. And as a founder, if you're coming in, don't just wear the badge, like drink the drink.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important, because whatever you're going to do now, the next wave of this is 5 years away.
Yeah.
I think the next wave of it will be more enterprise heavy. I think we've seen loads of consumer base, and we as individuals can play with it and get excited about how we can create a story for our kids. But I think the enterprise will be the ones that are really sort of grappling with how they use AI. And I'm really interested in, over the summer we had the actors strike.
Yeah.
Because they were rightly saying, it's not appropriate to use an image of my face and my voice and go and use this simulation to sell films without consulting me. That's my face.
Yeah.
And we can all understand that and think, yeah, that's not okay. But yeah, that's happening to businesses all the time. Like enterprises are taking vast pockets of their data, they're handing it over. Other organizations are training AI systems on them to create a product which they then sell back to them. That is their data and their knowledge that someone else is harvesting for their economic benefit. And I think the idea about how our data is being used and when we're consenting it for it to be used in these systems, I think that will be a really big topic that we need to grapple with over the sort of coming years.
Absolutely. Yesterday, I heard someone refer to ChatGPT as the greatest IP heist of our time, which I thought was really funny. So, I mean, you're absolutely right. And I think, that some of these changes in regulation and stuff are really important. So I think that leads us really nicely to my next question, which is, what are some of the challenges that you, via your company or directly, have engaged either with the UK government or with the regulator to kind of pave the way and change to either upskill or even with investors, right? Either to kind of bridge that gap of inefficiencies or bring their skill level up to a place where they can see. As speaking about the loudest voices, we hear a lot of very loud voices that speak to governments across the world and so on. I would just love to know
It's all the same loud voices, unfortunately.
Well, arguably. So what are some of the things you guys have done driven by the work that your companies are doing?
I write to our Prime Minister probably every 2 weeks at this point. He's probably fed up of getting letters from me or emails. And my sort of voice of cry has been, AI is the trifecta. We missed the cloud. We didn't regulate it. So therefore, we let the power of our data now and compute be owned by American companies. We missed regulating social media. So we let the power of distribution be regulated by American and one Chinese company. Now we're cribbing that we need to regulate AI. We can't do anything without the two legs that it's built upon. So let's not make the same mistake of listening to American CEOs telling the British government how to create policy, because ultimately then we'll only have an American version of history, and we'll lose everything that all the small countries around the world have built.
I fully agree. I think it's you've got to be suspicious when companies start throwing their hands up and say, regulate me, regulate me. Why are they doing that? Because they feel they've reached a point in terms of their market position where they can control that regulation, they can make it help them and hold back their competitors. And I think, unfortunately, probably our UK government is listening too much to those people. And the risk here is, everybody thinks about the risks of AI, and there's lots of risks about AI. I think the biggest existential risk in AI is that we fall behind from a technological point of view and economically as a result. China looks back on what they call their long century of shame, of humiliation, where they fell behind at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and then for over 120 years went through really difficult economic period. And that is influencing them today in terms of their real focus to try and push forward here. The risk is that we regulate, we fall behind, and the US and China rush ahead, and we're left out of the party here, and we become our long century of humiliation and shame as a result of it. And I think that's a really dangerous place to be. And so I really think this biggest existential risk is that we fall behind economically and technologically as a result.
And that regulation, as you say, makes it anti-competitive. So, for example, to be appropriately regulated, you have to be able to recreate the same output from an AI algorithm across a data set that's so enormous that only a handful of people have access to that volume of data. And then suddenly you're able to block out all innovation from innovative startups that are exploring ways of deploying lean AI. So I think we've got to make sure that that is done appropriately.
Well, and it goes down to the STEM of education as well. So I remember being in at one of the breakfasts at number 10, and they're talking about STEM, and like after half an hour, I was like, guys, I think we're missing the boat here. If we're still talking about STEM, it's too late.
Yeah.
We're really hoping we're in the era of polymaths at this point. And I've said this a few times, but in the past, but to me, it's the only time in history that reminds me of Da Vinci's period. Because you've got mathematicians, scientists, physicists, historians, literasts, musicians, artists coming together. They kind of need to, because this next evolution will otherwise be so myopic it won't reflect humanity.
Exactly. Yeah. So there is this need to kind of expand out and talk about broader. And I think some of this comes back to, Poppy, your point at the beginning, which is we don't help ourselves by calling this AI. All of it is called AI, right? And we've just talked about all sorts of different things, right? We've talked all the way from what the AI summit in November is targeted towards at the moment, which is artificial general intelligence and safety at that kind of existential frontier technologies end, all the way to kind of narrow, what we would have typically called narrow AI technologies, which are targeting a very specific problem, right? And because we put all of this together, I completely agree, Nigel. At one end, we do need kind of world agreement on how to deal with it. Along that spectrum, if we try and regulate that entire elephant, then we will fall behind. And so there is this need to kind of try and understand where we are on there.
Well, you also have I say the last thing, and it was a really interesting conversation I had with someone. They said, when you think about the prison service, the researchers, the prison operators, the civil servants, even the MPs, there's no information asymmetry. Problem you have in AI is there is so much information asymmetry, and then when you have asymmetry, you also then have, to your point earlier on, people's agendas. Especially if you're an American company CEO coming in, sitting in number 10, you have an agenda. It is not for the betterment of the entire world. You have an agenda. You're a capitalist. And so I think the problem you have is you have asymmetry and agendas, and then you have this really just large monolith topic that no one understands how to break up.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes it complex.
And I think even our AI experts, they live in a world of software where computers have just got better. You wake up in the morning and you look at your mobile phone. What an amazing piece of technology. Maybe once upon a time that technology would have filled your bedroom. No. It would have filled a data center the size of the UK.
Wow.
The improvements in semiconductor have been so big and so great that that's the kind of compression, improvement in technology that we have lived through. It's allowed us to send people to the moon, satellites off into deep space. None of that would have been possible without semiconductors and the improvements in semiconductors that we've seen. About 25 billion-fold improvement over the last 40 years. But it's slowing down.
Yes.
And why is ChatGPT delayed? Because it's too bloody expensive to run. They need to actually parallelize it across computers, and they can't deliver low latency. It's too expensive to deliver the service. And that's a fundamental problem. So computers will get better, computers will improve, but the rate at which they improve is going to slow down, and we're hitting the edge of the asymptote where it will start to really slow down. So this idea that AI will just run out of control, maybe in the minds of the AI developers, but we're so early in the cycle here, and the computers won't get better.
Yeah.
So there's a natural break built in here. And the risk is that we fall behind, because we're worried about it, and we fall behind. And I think when you look at the details of it, you've really got to recognize that this isn't going to run out of control anytime soon. It just really isn't.
So CogX has been set up to look at how to get the next 10 years right. And I think we have fallen into the trap of answering the same question, into the trap because what we really want to try and do with this panel, and I'll try and do for the next 10 minutes, is to give some kind of point-in-time advice to the audience about what they might do, how they might learn from you in the actual kind of starting a business. So I fully agree, and obviously that is where my interests lie. So I've been sitting here listening with all ears on what you have to say, because I think you're absolutely right. And there is a lot to be done around the summit, and we'll come back to it at the end to get your points on, to wrap things up. But if we can take a moment, if you were each to think about the kind of advice that you might give a budding entrepreneur or somebody who's starting a business, what are the kind of top things they should worry about? Is it where they get their engineers from? Is it where they're getting their compute from? Is it investment? What are the kind of things that you think should be top of mind in terms of worries for them? Let's go first.
Well, three simple things. What problem are you solving? Where are you going to get the talent from? And where are you going to get the capital from to be able to solve that problem? And, but it all levers on what problem are you solving? Are you really solving an important problem? Is this problem valuable? I think it was the founders of Spotify said the value of a company is the sum of all the problems you solve for your customers. And I really think that, those are the critical pieces to be thinking about as you start your company, so problem, how are you going to solve it, talent that is needed to solve it, and what capital do you need to be able to actually, make a stab at doing that.
I'd say as well, the scaling. Scaling, you could have the best product in the world, but unless you're able to keep up with that pace of demand, you're just going to trip over yourself. Yeah. And it's in those early days when everyone's busy running around and getting stuff, your growth is never linear. It's always it's like a staircase, and it's a selection of step changes. And in those early years, there's these people in your organization that are really valuable, and they're the person that you go to for everything. They need to come and do a customer presentation. The office printer's broken. You need to know whether Sue's on holiday on Tuesday. They're just the point of all knowledge, and you love this person because they're great and know everything. You've got to find who those people are in your business and replace them. Not by taking them out or making them redundant, but by putting a team or a structure or a process or something around those. Because if you don't, they will very quickly become a bottleneck in your ability to scale your organization. So I think your job as a leader is just to find those brilliant people in your business, value them, but then quickly move them out the way before they become the rate-limiting step on everything.
I love that advice. I love that advice. No one forget that.
What I would add is I think you have to fall in love with what you're doing, the problem you're solving. It goes to the founder problem fit. I feel like at some level you need to be in love with sort of the team that you're with. Because it comes to the third one, which is I feel you also need to be in love with being relentless and being uncomfortable. You have to get and it's a triangle because they're all linked. And if you can align that triangle, you will, success is just a matter of time and a bit of sprinkle of good luck, but it's just a matter of time. And relentlessness will mean that you will eventually find the luck.
Yeah.
And it's hard, but it is the best job in the world because you get to pick your team and everyone else has to work with the team that you pick. So it is a really good, fun time. Yeah.
Which actually, I'd like to ask one more question around the team and around scaling. So scaling a business, as you said, Poppy's really difficult. You go through this massive step change. You go from where everybody knows each other to nobody knows each other, and all of a sudden you've got all these new people, new faces, etc. How do you keep that strength of culture, that ability to kind of keep your stamp on things, or your way of wanting to raise and grow that company? How do you keep that up as the company grows?
I think you have to decide quite early what that is. when we started Graphcore, we were about 40 people. We sat everybody down in a room and we said, what do you like about being here? What is it you enjoy? We're the team, this is the company. What are our values? What are our common values? Because values are just how we choose to work together as a team. And I think that becomes the important thing. And then what you've got to do is, as you hire people in, you've got to test them against your values and say, we're about teamwork. This person's all about them. All they've said in the interview is it's all about me and I did this and I did that, and you really check whether that person is going to fit into the team that you've created. They might be brilliant, but maybe they're not going to fit inside the company. And so you've got to sort of build the company based on how you as a team want to work together as a team, and then try and stay true to that.
And it's hard as well, like when you go through those step changes, it's like that step change is always hard, and then suddenly it becomes easy again. So when you scale the business, I can remember that point where you go from not knowing everyone's name and what department it is, and suddenly you'll bump into someone in the staff kitchen, you think, I don't know, who's that? And that's weird, and it changes the way you communicate. Because I remember in the early days, the communication would be we're going for this, I'm not sure if it's going to work. If it is going to work, we'll see it on Tuesday over here, and if it doesn't, then we're going to go divert and go this direction. You can't communicate in that way when you're talking to hundreds or thousands of people. You have to be much more black and white. This is going to work, and it will be done by Tuesday. You have to be much more, because the story evolves and changes as it moves through the business. And that also affects culture and your role as a leader, because you're not necessarily you and in your direct conversations. It's how that cascades through the organization. But you do change and adapt, and you come out that other side of the step change.
I call it the rule of eights. You will know 8 people very well, they'll know 8 people very well. And so 64 people is like the perfect company size. And you get to about 100 and things start to break. And you need to bring in another layer of people that you really trust, who you know are carrying that through the organization. And if you put that in, you go another level of 8. You get to 500 people, and it will work. You get past 500 people, you get to 1,000 people, it all starts to break again.
Oh, we can now plot this staircase. We know what it looks like.
These are real gems. I hope everyone's taking notes and not drawing.
You can really see it. You can really see it. So it's the numbers of 8. It's the rule of 8s.
I would love to ask you, how have you, as a leader, changed as your company has grown as well? And where have you gone with your info for your own development, which is another thing I think people.
I think it's following on from a little bit what Poppy said. It's to be more prescriptive. So I had this one incident, sort of walking the hallway, and I look at this guy. I was like, you look really familiar. I went to school with him, and I bumped into him 6 months after he joined the company. I didn't even know he joined. So I was narrating this conversation that's been on a rise, and he said, look, you've got to become more prescriptive, and I didn't really understand what he meant. He said, as you become bigger and bigger, you need short, prescriptive messages. So for one, he said, if you think about people have two axes. They have behavior and they have nature. So you need to help them codify the behavior you want, and you have to codify the nature you want in the company. So for us, nature is deliberate, authentic, relentless. And behavior is heart. Have heart, be entrepreneurial, be accountable, respect, trust, transparency. So that was one. But then that was really open to interpretation. So then the thing was, you never had this issue with the first 20, 30 people. You could complete sentences, and half my leadership team has been here since the beginning. So the struggle was all these new folks, like how do we explain it to them? And we realized that, one, you needed a critical mass of people that have been here long enough in any team, in any region, in any org, because culture is like water, so it sort of it's like osmosis, but in the right direction. But the other one, which I think was the best advice I got, he said, write it down. So we ended up writing a book, which is the Builder Way of Life, and we give it to everyone. And we're like, if you can't, in these 100 pages, and in each page has got 4 or 5 lines and some big pictures, and if you can't find the answer, then come and ask someone. But the idea was that this will give you at least how we all think about the world and how to bridge from it.
Brilliant. We have 30 seconds left, so I'm going to give Nigel the floor. You said that, speaking of books, there was something you wanted to mention to the audience.
Oh yeah, I wrote a book. A lot of time on aeroplanes and trains and various other things. So because I got asked so many times about AI and, oh, it's going to run our lives and I don't trust it and all the rest of it, I sat down, I wrote a book which is called How AI Thinks. It's coming out in February. I think the publishing industry is still stuck in the 16th century, so it takes a long time for books to come out. It's coming, Transworld Penguin publishing the book. And it's all about how AI thinks and how we think and how we got to where we are and the ways in which we can control AI and how it can help us in all these different areas. So I'm very excited.
Brilliant. And it's ready for pre-order now. So it just is enough time for me to say an absolute massive thank you to everyone.
Thank you.
It's a real pleasure to speak to the three of you and such an amazing opportunity to have you all on stage with me. So thank you very much. And a round of applause for our panel, please.